Spiritual awakening isn't always the freedom you think it is. Sometimes, it becomes the prison. You feel like something is opening, expanding. You see signs everywhere. You cry more, feel more. You go through dark nights, synchronicities, and deep insights. It feels like growth, but something's wrong. You're still stuck, still confused, still looping through the same emotions, over and over. Why? Because 90% of people get caught in a hidden trap, a loop disguised as transformation, a cycle that feels like awakening, but is actually the ego wearing a spiritual mask. You meditate, journal, heal, purge. But underneath all that light, you're still chasing, still escaping, still searching for something to save you from yourself. Have you ever noticed how awakening can become an identity? How pain becomes proof that you're evolving? How chaos starts to feel comfortable because it means you're still in the process? This is the trap. Not because you're weak, but because the ego is clever. It knows how to turn even your healing into a way of staying in control. In this video, we're not here to shame the journey. We're here to free you from the loop, because real awakening doesn't repeat. It integrates. It doesn't keep you chasing healing. It brings you home. And until you see the trap for what it is, you'll keep calling the cage a breakthrough. The spiritual awakening feels like a door opening, a flood of light, emotion, purpose, memory. You start sensing things more deeply, questioning everything you were taught, craving something real, something pure. But what most don't realize is that awakening has layers. And the first layer, the one that feels so powerful at the start, can quickly become a trap disguised as progress. You start waking up to the patterns of your past, trauma, conditioning, inherited pain, and it's painful. So painful that it must be growth, right? You feel overwhelmed, confused. You begin shedding old beliefs, breaking down identities, dissolving illusions. And yet months, even years, go by, and you're still stuck in the spiral, still crying over the same wounds, still battling the same fear, still asking the same questions. Why do so many stay trapped there? Because no one tells you that the ego doesn't die during awakening. It adapts. It evolves with you. It puts on a white robe, picks up a crystal and says, "Now I'm spiritual." This is the trap. When the ego merges with the identity of awakening, it creates a new false self, one that feels holy, but is still afraid, one that seeks light, but can't sit in silence, one that says, "I'm healing forever," but never lets itself be healed. Have you ever noticed how the moment you feel clarity, another crisis arrives? How as soon as peace settles in, the mind whispers, "But what if you're not done yet?" That's not your soul. That's the spiritualized ego, addicted to the chaos of becoming. It doesn't want stillness. Stillness is terrifying, because in stillness, there's nothing to do, no identity to perform, only presence. And presence is the one thing the ego can't survive. This is why 90% of awakening journeys stall out in endless cycles. You think you're moving forward, but you're just circling the same mountain with new words. The emotional purges, the shadow work marathons, the constant need for signs, confirmations, and validation. They're not wrong, they're just incomplete. Awakening begins with breakdown, but it must end in embodiment. And embodiment doesn't feel dramatic. It feels ordinary, quiet, real. But that's not exciting to the ego, so it keeps you chasing the next spiritual high, the next purge, the next pain, the next upgrade. Ask yourself now with honesty, am I growing or looping? Am I integrating or just processing endlessly? Because the awakening trap isn't made of lies. It's made of partial truths, just enough insight to feel awake, but not enough grounding to actually be free. And until you see it, you'll keep thinking the spiral is the path. But real freedom doesn't loop, it lands, and it asks, can you stop seeking long enough to simply be? In the early phases of awakening, chaos becomes familiar, even addictive. You start to feel things more intensely. Heartbreak cuts deeper. Memories resurface without warning. Synchronicities appear at strange hours. And suddenly, your life feels like one giant download after another. It feels like something big is happening. It must be growth, right? But what if the chaos isn't proof of transformation? Just proof that you're still in the storm. Chaos is magnetic. It keeps you moving, feeling, reacting. And in the awakening journey, it's easy to confuse motion with evolution. Have you ever felt guilty when things got quiet? Like if you're not going through some kind of deep emotional process, then you must be stagnating? This is the wound most seekers carry. We equate stillness with failure. We assume if we're not purging, we're not progressing. So we unconsciously invite chaos back in to reassure ourselves that we're still on the path. But here's the paradox. The more addicted you are to spiritual intensity, the less capacity you build for spiritual maturity. Because maturity doesn't chase fireworks. It holds silence. It walks slowly. It stops needing constant proof that something is happening. Chaos feels like growth because it triggers your attention. It makes you feel alive. It mimics the early stages of awakening, when the old self is breaking apart. But that stage is not meant to last forever. Eventually, the soul craves integration. Not more triggers, not more upheaval, but rest, embodiment, simplicity. Ask yourself, have I mistaken emotional intensity for spiritual depth? Am I uncomfortable when peace arrives? Because I don't know who I am without the struggle? This is where many get stuck. They keep reopening wounds that are already healing, just to stay in the momentum. They seek new shadows to process, even when what they need is gentleness. But chaos isn't the goal, it's the portal. Real growth happens after the storm, when you sit with yourself, no longer needing drama to feel awake. When you stop chasing the next emotional collapse as validation that you're evolving. Your nervous system isn't broken, it's overstimulated. Your spirit isn't confused, it's begging for you to slow down. You don't need more explosions to evolve. You need space. You need quiet integration. You need to stop mistaking the noise for the message. Because healing doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just whispers, "You're safe now. Let it be easy." The most clever mask the ego wears is the one that looks enlightened. It stops chasing money, status, validation, and starts chasing awakening. It swaps out material desires for spiritual ones. And at first, it looks like growth. You're meditating, reading sacred texts, connecting to your intuition. But beneath it all, the same old voice is whispering, "You're not there yet. You're still not enough. Try harder." That's not your soul speaking. That's the ego, now wearing beads and quoting Rumi. Have you ever caught yourself comparing your journey to others? Wondering if someone is more awakened than you? Feeling inadequate because you're not having visions, downloads, or deep cosmic insights like someone on Instagram? That's the ego playing dress up. It doesn't care if it's competing for money or for enlightenment. It just wants to stay alive. And if pretending to be spiritual helps it survive, it will do exactly that. This is why spiritual awakening often becomes a new identity. One more version of self the ego can control. Now instead of, "I'm not successful enough," it becomes, "I'm not healed enough." Instead of, "I don't look good," it becomes, "I don't meditate enough." You never arrive, because the ego thrives on the chase. But awakening was never meant to be an identity. It's not a personality. It's not a brand. It's not a contest. True awakening is ego death, not ego transformation. But ego doesn't want to die, so it mimics the soul. It talks about love, light, alignment, while secretly feeding on your insecurities. It tells you to keep fixing yourself, keep purging, keep healing, because you're still not whole enough to rest. Ask yourself honestly, has your spiritual path become another way to avoid yourself? Has your need to be awakened become more important than simply being real? Because the more awakened you become, the more subtle the ego gets. It stops yelling and starts whispering. It starts quoting spiritual wisdom to justify avoidance. It turns inner work into performance. But real inner work is raw, messy, unimpressive. It's crying on the floor. It's staring at the ceiling with no answers. It's not knowing who you are and being okay with that. The ego wants clarity, structure, definition. But the soul lives in the mystery. And the only way to catch the ego in disguise is to ask, am I using this practice to deepen into truth or to build a more acceptable version of me? Because truth doesn't need to be impressive. It just needs to be felt. And when you stop performing awakening and start living it, that's when the ego loses its grip. Not with a bang, but with a breath. One of the most dangerous patterns in spiritual awakening is repetition that feels like progress. You cry, release, journal, reflect. You revisit childhood wounds, confront fears, speak affirmations. But weeks pass, months, sometimes years, and you're still facing the same pain as if healing never touched it. Why does this happen? Because healing isn't just about feeling, it's about completion. And most people don't realize they're not actually completing their pain. They're rehearsing it, holding on to it, even identifying with it. Have you ever said to yourself, "This always happens to me"? Have you ever felt a deep wound rising and thought, "Here we go again"? That moment, that recognition, is where choice begins. But the trap is, the pain feels familiar. And in a world where the ego lost its old identities, pain becomes the new anchor. If I'm still hurting, I must still be growing. If I'm still crying, I must be evolving. If I'm still processing, I must be awake. But not all pain means you're progressing. Sometimes pain means you're stuck in the memory of who you were, looping it, nursing it, and unknowingly keeping it alive. You become the wounded healer, the one who's always in process, always releasing, but never released. This isn't because you're weak. It's because somewhere along the path, pain became sacred. And without realizing, you began to protect it. You built an altar around it. You made it part of your identity. But what if letting go of that pain doesn't mean you're abandoning your growth, but completing it? Ask yourself gently, am I holding on to this because it's still real, or because it's what I've known the longest? Sometimes you've done the work. Sometimes the wound has nothing left to teach you. But the story still plays, out of habit. You reread the same emotional scripts. You enter the same types of relationships. You respond with the same defenses. And then you wonder, why am I not moving forward? Because awakening is not just about awareness. It's about liberation. And liberation means you don't just observe the pattern. You step out of it. You say, I see you, I honor you, and I no longer need you to define me. This is what breaks the loop, not another purge, not another meditation, but the courage to say, that pain is done, I'm ready to live beyond it. And that moment, that declaration, is not loud. It's subtle, it's cellular. It's the day you stop waiting for pain to confirm your growth and allow peace to do it instead. There comes a moment on the path when the work itself becomes the trap, not the darkness, not the trauma, but the endless pursuit of fixing, cleansing, clearing, unlocking. And without noticing, you're no longer healing to be whole. You're healing to stay busy. Healing becomes your identity, your full-time job, your reason for being. You move from one modality to the next, one course, one session, one release after another. You learn every system, memorize every term, and yet, your heart still aches. Your nervous system still feels on edge. Your peace still disappears the moment life becomes quiet. Have you ever found yourself uncomfortable when things are calm? Like if nothing is breaking down, you must be missing something. That's the addiction, not to pain, but to the idea that something is always wrong. The ego loves this, because as long as you're in the process, it still has control. As long as you're fixing, you're not fully arriving. And as long as you're seeking, you don't have to become. But healing is meant to open a door, not become the room you live in. There is a place beyond the process, a place where you stop rearranging your wounds and start living from your truth, a place where the spiral ends and presence begins. But to reach that place, you have to release the identity of the seeker. You have to stop needing to feel broken in order to feel real. Ask yourself, have I mistaken the path for the destination? Am I healing to evolve or healing to avoid stillness? Integration is not as glamorous as awakening. It doesn't give you visions. It doesn't shake your body. It doesn't bring cosmic downloads. It brings grounding, embodiment, simplicity. It brings the quiet joy of being okay, without needing a reason to be okay. But simplicity threatens the spiritual ego. Because if you're not healing, what are you doing? If you're not transforming, what's left to become? The answer is everything. Everything you were meant to feel. Everything you've already become. Everything the soul has always known, waiting beneath the noise of improvement. Integration says, you've seen enough. You've released enough. Now, live it. It doesn't mean you'll never feel pain again. It means pain no longer defines your reality. It becomes a wave, not a home. And the moment you can sit in peace without guilt, rest without explanation, and love without the need to fix anything, that's the moment the real shift begins. Not with more effort, but with finally allowing yourself to arrive. There is a truth your soul has always known, but your mind, your fear, your ego kept you from fully receiving it. You were never broken. You were never behind. You were never less awakened than anyone else. You were simply caught in the cycle of seeking what you already are. And now you are being called to something different. Not another breakthrough, not another dark night, but completion. You've seen the patterns. You've walked through the fires. You've cracked open in the middle of the night, praying for clarity, for peace, for purpose. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that you are the clarity. You are the peace. You are the purpose. This is the invitation. To no longer perform your awakening, to no longer chase it, to no longer identify with the wounds, the chaos, the endless becoming, but to land in your being, because awakening isn't something you finish. It's something you integrate. It doesn't ask for drama. It asks for presence. Can you let go of the belief that something is missing? Can you release the identity that is always seeking more? Can you trust that stillness doesn't mean you've stopped? It means you've arrived. Most people stay trapped, not because they aren't worthy of peace, but because they never learned how to let it stay. They expect awakening to be wild, intense, emotional. But true awakening is ordinary. It's walking through your life with a quiet, grounded heart. It's cooking dinner and feeling connected to the universe at the same time. It's being in traffic and breathing anyway. It's laughing without needing to analyze the vibration behind it. This is freedom, not from pain, but from the illusion that pain is your identity. Not from emotion, but from addiction to emotional turbulence. So if you're ready, take a breath, feel the ground, release the chase. You don't need to suffer to prove you're evolving. You don't need to spiral to stay connected. You don't need to try so hard. Because the final truth is this: the more you return to yourself, the more you realize you were never trapped, just asleep inside your own awakening. And now you remember, and now you are free.